Let's welcome another Ohio State grad, Rory Krupp, who majored in probably the most recondite and seemingly impractical field in history, ancient history, and classics of all things.
Is that still a major?
It is still a major.
Yeah, there were like very few of us when I did that.
Very few, and getting fewer all the time.
Right, so I also have a minor in archaeology.
In anthropology. And he has a master's in American history with certificates in historic preservation from the University of Cincinnati. He's worked in historic preservation and cultural resource management since 1987. He's a principal of Owens Eastlake, a historic preservation firm here in Columbus. So he will tell you about career opportunities there.
Okay, so what I do is historic preservation and cultural resource management. It's kind of the same thing, except historic preservation is when you want to do it, and cultural resource management is when someone makes you do it, such as the federal government. So it's kind of the same thing. I started in '83 and graduated in '94. I was on the 10-year plan, so it's a good like 80s undergraduate. I had Dr. Rosenstein about 1987. So my route to history was a little serendipitous. I have my minor's in archaeology, and I had a field school one summer in North American archaeology, and when it was done, the professor said, does anyone want a job in this? Someone called me and they need someone to go ahead of a pipeline and dig things up. So I'm like, why not? I'll do that for us this summer. I have anything to do. So my brother dropped me off in southern Indiana, like thinking I would be killed. That's crazy. And I worked the rest of the summer on an excavation. So 13 of them actually, a series across southern Indiana where they had previously found a site and we tested it. And so we found some things, but not a lot. And when I got back at the end of the summer, I got a job at a local environmental consulting firm. A little part-time, like 10 hours a week, and I washed rocks. Because they did archaeology too, and I'm like, I did a field school, they're like, come on down. So I washed rocks, but since I was also a historian, they let me write county histories, or township histories that go in the reports that you write when you like make a highway or something like that. Depending on how big the project is, there could be a lot of townships. So naturally a highway has more. If we would do like a little coal mine or something like that, or an air vent for a coal mine, one township, and you go out and look at it and things like that. So I would go out in the field quite a bit, and while you're out there, you also look at houses, objects, buildings, bridges. Is it eligible for the National Register or is it not? And you have to decide out there and make a recommendation so that the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, can say yay or nay. You've got to like go around it, save it, dig it up, do something with it. But you can't destroy it in the end. So I did that for quite a while, for years. So it gradually increased my responsibilities from like digging little holes to running excavations, writing larger and larger reports, and doing more and more research, and doing more architectural history things. So identifying houses, bits and pieces, things like that. And so as I did it, like the projects got bigger. So a couple years ago, I went in excavation of a Shaker settlement in Lebanon, Ohio, and worked on that for a couple months. We excavated 4 buildings, found quite a bit of stuff, and at the end there was an archival component, and no one wanted to do it. I'm like, that's crazy. Why would you want to do this? And it involved reading all of the diaries and daybooks that they had written. So they dropped off this like box of microfilm by my desk, 36 reels of microfilm. So for 8 months, 8 hours a day, I rode my bike to work and read diaries and daybooks and tried to figure out the history of everything that we had excavated. And then spent another year with 3 other people writing a 4-volume report, which you can get online. So they changed the highway. That's how we had to do it. They straightened a curve in the highway and went through the village. So I do things like that. So there's like a lot of research components involved, and archaeology at times. And after that, I had another large project which involved locks and dams. Right before during the recession, is like the Obama job, one of the shovel-ready things. The Corps of Engineers has an easement on 200 feet of each side of the Ohio River that they can flood. For some, people don't know it, but yeah, they can expand. So they wanted to keep track of everything that they could flood and wipe out. So for a year, I went up and down the Ohio and looked at locks and dams and houses that they might wipe out if they something cut loose. At that point, the recession was in full bore, so I'm like, I'm gonna go back to school, because I just had a undergraduate degree, and just like had gradually worked my way up. But at a point, I could couldn't sign reports and things like that to send them in. Like my boss could do it, so I'd write it and then hand it off. So I'm like, I'm gonna go get my master's. So I went to Cincinnati, did that, got a scholarship, got it paid for, did my TA thing, the whole deal, in American history, and I got my certificate in preservation, breezed through that, because I'd already done it pretty much. And then when I got out, I went into business. So I've done that for 6 years now. And then I do more preservation now. I do some cultural resource management still. We're like experts in low-head dams, which is a weird thing. But some are historic and some aren't. And so, but before you pull it out, you have to make sure it's not one of the historic ones. And if it is, we just make an architectural drawing of it and go from there. The other thing we do is we write up a lot of histories of things for people or developers and things like that. And right now we have a contract with Owens History Connection. We're writing a history of 20th century African American civil rights in Ohio, and we're looking for associated historic sites. So I spent the last month driving around Ohio looking at places that might be National Register worthy in the civil rights context, as well as like spending like 4 months before that, like just doing archival research, like figuring out like how civil rights worked in Ohio versus a national context, like what makes it different here than it was anyplace else, and that type of thing. So a lot of things is figuring out like how do history differs locally than like a national thing, or does it differ from like the general literature, and that type of thing. And for that, we just like go back to the source, like archival, or if we have to, we'll just dig it up. So, and try and figure it out. So, essentially that's what I do. So, and have done. So, it's history. I write papers and stuff. I just wrote a paper about cultural landscapes in the Serpent Mound, how it affected the stratigraphy of the mound. It was restored in the 30s and no one had figured it out. I found a receipt for it, like they restored it. It's not supposed to be restored, which, they put another layer on, which changes a lot of things. So, yeah. So, essentially, I do history. I write papers all day, is basically what I do, or do research. So, that's about it.
Okay. Questions?
Rory, how easy is it to get a job in historic preservation these days?
There are like large like engineering companies that do it. So I think you can still get in and work your way up. Yeah, it's not real glamorous when you start off. You're guaranteed to get poison ivy most of the time, and things like that. But yeah, I mean there's a lot of field work, but it's doable.
Have you had anything to do with the Newark earthworks at all?
The newest?
Newark
No,
earthworks?
it was included in my paper because it too was restored. And they used the same technique on the Serpent Mound, which they didn't know. So, it's
Even
about,
though isn't there a golf club all around it, right? That
Yeah.
still insists that they own this.
there are some controversies about, the ownership and stuff like that. So, yeah, or like just getting onto it. You get your twice a year, you can go visit it, unless you're golfing. So.